Today on the Locked On Knicks podcast, will the New York Knicks go over or under 53.5 wins? I think you know which way we're going, but find out next.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks, and you're going to find out a couple of times, but today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. If you want to become an everydayer, be sure to subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you never miss an episode. And then if you want to be a good everydayer, you want to be in good standing when you're an everydayer, be sure to comment, be sure to like, be sure to leave a 5-star review. All of that helps grow the podcast that we bring to you 3 to 5 days a week. Little less in the summer during the season, 5 days a week full time. Be sure to hit the subscription button on your podcast platform of choice, as well as so you have us with you on the go. But who's talking to you? Gavin Shaw, covering the NBA for a decade now. He is Alex Wolf's editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at the strict.land for Knicks content all summer long and through the year. When they're going to be winning more than 53.5 games, I am staking my claim. People got a little bit of a spoiler from me, Alex, but I talked about it with our guy Josh Lloyd on the last 2 episodes that came out, but I didn't really get to go into depth on why I think they're going to win 53.5 games. So with the league-wide over-unders coming out, the Knicks, by the way, third highest over-under behind only the Celtics and the Thunder in the entire NBA at 53.5. I thought now would be a good time to talk about it. I got to imagine a little bit because we talked about it pre-show, but you are in the same camp as me.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the over train. I mean, it's a great place to be in, right? Where we could be like, well, they won 50 last year, but I definitely think they're going to improve by like 3 to 4 games this year minimum. Well, it has to be at least 4 to go over 53.5. I don't think it'll be an issue. Like I think 55 is probably a realistic number. You know, it's going to be a tough conference, but the Knicks are going to be a tough team. I mean, they're a team that has consistently been one of the best regular season teams under Tibbs, have always kind of punched above where everybody thought they were going to be. So it stands to reason that if everybody thinks they're going to be in a 53 win team, they're probably going to be a 55, 56 win team because they always go above what is projected during the regular season, because Tibbs famously treats every game like it's, you know, a postseason game, you know, which for better or worse, you know, we've seen the best of that and the worst of that. You know, the best of it has been in 3 of his 4 seasons with the Knicks, and the worst was just the 1 season where obviously we would still have, you know, guys playing late in games that didn't really matter at that point and whatever. But that's not going to be the case in this season. This season is all about win as many games as you can, secure a high seed, try to keep everybody healthy too, which would be great, which maybe we'll kind of get into in the show a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, without spoiling too much, without, you know, spoiling what we think the win totals are going to be or whatever, although I just sort of alluded to it a little bit, leave a little meat on the bone there. I think they've done enough. You know, I understand that the Isaiah Hartenstein loss is big, but I think they did enough with the Mikal Bridges acquisition that their ceiling goes up quite a bit this coming year because of that, because that's another bona fide, whether you want to call him like a superstar or you want to just call him a superstar role player, whatever you want to call him. It's a guy that can score the ball, that can defend, that can do a little bit of everything. And you have him with OG Anunoby. Everybody else but Bridges has been on this team together already. So there's tons of continuity that they're not going to have a breaking in period at the beginning of the season. Like this team is going to come out of the gates hot, and I think they're going to stay that way and probably win, you know, in the mid 50s this year.
Yeah, I'm with you, and we're going to go over all the factors basically that will decide whether or not they go over 53.5. But I think you just highlighted a great one that wasn't in my notes. Like they should get off to a fantastic start. Right there should be a margin for error. Like I don't really expect there to be a breaking in period for Mikal Bridges, right? Because he's played with these guys, and Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson he's played with recently during the World Cup, and it looked fantastic. And it was pretty clear that none of them missed a beat. And maybe it's because they're playing pickup together all summer, but I could really see them starting like to use the record since they got OG Anunoby, something like 20-3 or 20-4. And we just found out that first game of the year is going to be against the Boston Celtics. Even if they lose that, I could see them winning like 20 of their next 23 and just being in having such a cushion. And it could take that potentially, because two pieces that are absolutely essential for them are major health risks that I am talking about. Of course, OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson. So I put the number for the Knicks to hit 54 wins, which is the minimum, as you noted. I think OG and Mitch, to feel really safe about that, I need them to play 50 games each. I think there's a world where Anunoby could miss, even though he's a better player than Mitch. Mitch is just more important after the loss of Hartenstein, or I don't know. That's debatable. Maybe you disagree with that, but I think with Bridges, without Hartenstein, Mitch is probably the more important player. But if they both hit a minimum of 50 games, which is fairly conservative, I feel pretty good about the Knicks going over. OG has hit 65, which would be like my ideal number where I feel sure that they're going over. Only once in the last 4 seasons after playing at least 67 in his first 3. So there is some precedent to him playing a lot. Just hasn't happened recently. Mitch, conversely, he's played 59 plus in 4 of his 7 seasons. For Mitch, it's really just been 2 disaster seasons. 2 years ago, or excuse me, his 3rd year in the league, which was now 4 years ago, he played 31 games. And then last year, he only played 31 games. So outside of that, Mitch has been more or less reliably between 59 and 72 games. So I say all that to say, Alex, like I feel pretty good that we're not going to get the doomsday scenario given what happened last year. It just feels like the odds should swing back in the Knicks' favor. But if you want to look at like the one thing that could take them down, it's that, or it's the health of Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, which is less risky, but of course, in some ways more important, Brunson in particular.
Yeah, I mean, Brunson has kind of showed that, at least to this point with the Knicks, he's like, it's always like the injury sliders are turned down with him or something. Like
We did have the one big time scare, but
yeah, I mean, 3 separate times or so last year, I found myself feeling like, oh no, this is it. That the point where his foot was dragging on the floor, that was the one, especially where I was like, oh my God, what just happened to my boy's knee here? Like he's done. And yet, he managed to just keep powering through. Julius Randle, kind of similar. Like other than a couple of somewhat freak injuries, has managed to stay relatively injury free. Obviously, Mikal Bridges too, you're looking at and you're going, this guy's not missed a game in his NBA career yet. I don't think he's missed a game since high school. So, you can feel pretty safe about banking on his health. Josh Hart as well, I think was pretty healthy up until the playoffs last year when his one ab muscle just like fell off the bone in the postseason. And same with Dante DiVincenzo. I mean, he missed a couple games, but I think in general, like your core guys are pretty healthy, which is good. I think TBD on Precious a little bit. We'll have to see how he holds up to a bigger workload. I didn't really look to see what his injury history is like, but I don't know how much you could totally glean from like his games played report anyway, because he was kind of on again, off again in Toronto, and certainly not a guy that was playing every single game. So we'll see how he holds up to that workload as well. But yeah, I think OG, I'm with you. I think that OG is probably I would say a bigger risk than Mitch too. Like, I think Mitch, we tend to forget a little bit, like a lot of his injuries up until the last year or so, like when it was his ankle, a lot of his injuries were pretty freak injuries. Like it was like a broken wrist. What do you have? The broken foot or whatever the one year. And
yeah,
it just,
he's just always falling awkwardly is my
yeah, it's like awkward falls. And then like he breaks something weird, and he's out for a little bit and then he comes back and then he has bad luck again and breaks something else small, but that's going to take him 4 weeks to heal or whatever. Kind of just always seems to be the case with him. So I feel all right about him, and I think that he's in the best shape that he's been in his career. So I hope that plays into his health, in that, just being in good shape and moving well and everything else makes it so then it's easier for him to keep healthy. OG, I feel pretty decent about too. And, maybe it's being a little overly overly optimistic, I guess, but most of his time last year was because of a bone spur in his elbow. And I don't think he's going to have one of those again unless he falls and bangs his elbow real hard again. Like it happened before he got traded to the Knicks. Obviously, they thought that he could work through it. Then he couldn't. He had to get operated on. Wasn't able to get back right away. Then gets back, and then obviously down the stretch of the season had a quad ultimately that kept him out. And tried to give it a go. Couldn't quite make it work. In that game 7, and that was pretty tough. But I think that reasonably, if you can sort of manage his workload, which I think will be a lot easier with the amount of depth that this team has, I think you can do a pretty good job of keeping his regular season not light, but like easier, which should then allow him to come in and have high leverage minutes without having to play like 40 of them, and hopefully keep him healthy throughout the season. So I'm optimistic, and I think that will, to your point, play a really big part in how high the Knicks are able to go as far as their win total this year.
100%. And look, and Sean Woodley came on this podcast, Locked On Raptors host, and said like same thing you just said about Mitch. Like OG's injury history is almost entirely fluky. It's just that like at a certain point, like when it happens 4 years in a row, like it just can't all be bad luck. So it is dicey, but I think we were kind of in agreement. Like his injury was the one. I mean, and until Hart got hurt, and that was just the wheels falling off. That was genuinely a product of workload with the hamstring, and that's not going to be an issue this year with Mikal Bridges. And if he does get hurt, the Knicks like are just more able to replace him. It's not ideal, but you get like the upshot of him getting hurt or Bridges, which probably won't happen, but if Bridges got hurt or if Randall got hurt, you get to put Dante DiVincenzo in the starting lineup, and he's someone who's proven capable of like playing like a borderline all-star level if you need it for a 6-game stretch, maybe not for a 20-game stretch, but if not, he's an elite role player for that 20-game stretch. He's an elite 3-point shooter for that 20-game stretch. And you actually like weirdly by losing one of your superstars, you gain someone who like might actually make your offense more free flowing. And it's not to say like any of us are rooting for an injury. And obviously the Knicks are going to be at their best when they're whole, and Tibbs can like mix and match to the best of his abilities. But everywhere except for center, they have depth to survive. I think, Alex, when we come back, we should talk about what happens if there is an injury at center, though, with Mitchell Robinson, because if he misses half the year, obviously you'd expect the Knicks to make a trade, but that could be a disaster. We'll get into that next on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you guys know about our friends over at FanDuel. If you couldn't tell from the episode, that is based around FanDuel odds. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But luckily, we're close to the NBA season, as we're seeing with all these odds. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, all summer long. And an odd we're not going to talk about on this show, but I may as well highlight the Knicks plus 1,000 to win the NBA Cup, the renamed in-season tournament. So plus 1,000, that's the fourth best odds, but still, I mean, plus 1,000, not too shabby. So maybe I would look to do that. I mean, we're talking about how good the Knicks are probably going to come out. That's prime NBA Cup time to get yourself good seeding and qualify for the tournament first off. But then if they're really cooking at the beginning of the year, they might be able to win that thing and get all the role players paid, get all those guys on the end of the bench, an extra, whatever it is, $500,000 or whatever, 2 million. I don't know, some amount of millions. Anyway, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Gavin, we're back in, and you made a good point right before we went to break there about how important Mitch could be. And I think I'm with you. Like, I do think he is sort of the key to this team, because I like Precious, but I mean, I think we're both sort of in lockstep on this. Like, if we didn't make it abundantly clear enough with a million shows about like who the Knicks should get to back up Mitch, I don't know if we're necessarily sold on him as like a full-time backup for Mitch, but I think that's just sort of where the Knicks find themselves right now. There were some conflicting reports about whether he could be traded by December 15th, January 15th, based off how he was signed and everything else. I guess we'll see how that bears out as the season goes on and we get closer to that date and we start hearing rumors about whether he's going to get traded or not. But he signed to an okay amount of money, and they have enough guys on the bench and different salaries and whatever, that I think they could make something work for another center if they had to. But I hope they don't get to that point, because I think what gets lost in the shuffle a little bit with iHeart leaving is just how good Mitch still is. Like, I think he just doesn't offer you a lot of the same things that iHeart did on offense that unlocked that side of the ball for the Knicks. So they're going to have to figure that piece of the puzzle out. But they got more talented on offense by getting Bridges in here. So hopefully you could sort of make up with that by the fact that you have so many shooters and just so much offensive firepower at this point. But like, defensively, Mitch is still so good, and like, he's going to anchor this defense this year. I mean, he at his best, I think, anchors the defense in a way that iHeart can't quite,
Yeah.
which is not a knock on iHeart. It's just a plus for Mitch. It's just how good Mitch is on that end of the ball. And it's easy to forget, but like, he started last year looking like he could be a defensive player of the year candidate potentially, and played well enough early in the year that iHeart got kind of relegated back to being like a 20-minute per game backup. And Mitch was playing like 25 to 30 minutes per game in most of those games before he got hurt. And then things just kind of shifted the other direction once iHeart came in after Mitch was hurt. But, I think if he could stay healthy, that's probably the biggest thing that's going to determine how high this Knicks win total can go, because I think that he's going to, if he's able to go out there and play 25 to 30 minutes a game and stay healthy for, like you said, like if it's like 65 games, even if it's like 70, something like that, they're going to have a really strong, stalwart defensive presence out there at the center spot to start every single game and to close every single game, and have Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby covering the front line in front of him. I mean, he's just going to feast. He's going to have so many easy opportunities on defense. And, I think his life is going to be a lot easier on that end, and it's going to free him up to get all the rebounds he gets, continue doing that on the offensive end as well. But without him, I think they lose a good deal of that with Precious Achiuwa out there instead. And I think that's probably, for me, I think I'm with you. Not for us to have an episode where we just agree the whole time, but I mean, I think that's the biggest indicator for me. Like, if Mitch only plays 30 games again, the Knicks are going to need to look for some help, and their win total and what they can do in the regular season is kind of capped by that.
Yeah, it's scary, because obviously you're not just going from Mitch to Precious, you're also going from Precious to Jericho potentially in the backup minutes. And there's a world where Tom Thibodeau does use that as an excuse to go small a little bit more. But even with OG at center, I think he would like to have Precious out there at power forward for some of those minutes, because Precious gives you a lot of switchability and a lot of mobility and still some size and still some rebounding. But then if you're starting him, you can't also use it with your bench unit. So it just it starts to get really thin really fast. And everywhere else, the two guys the Knicks don't have a replacement for are Jalen Brunson and Mitchell Robinson. They don't have a 1-for-1 replacement for Julius Randle, but as we saw in last year's playoffs, you can kind of put together a facsimile of his production by having Jalen Brunson snap into MVP, ultra high usage Brunson form. And if the shooters around him now are DiVincenzo, Anunoby, and Bridges, it'll be easier than ever for Brunson to do that and do that efficiently. And Bridges, obviously, even if he's not the best at it, we've seen he can ramp up and take more shots and at least kind of do an impression of a second scorer. He certainly did an impression of a first scorer for years in Brooklyn. So that's something. Something else you kind of got at, or maybe I just thought about it while you were talking, but I think another thing in the Knicks' favor for winning over 53.5 games is just their ability to take care of business. I forgot what the final tally was, but last year they started something like 17-0 or 16-1 against teams under 500. And to me, that's where I feel so good about this. Even if Mitch were to get hurt, even if OG were to get hurt, this team just feels like a well-oiled machine against crappy teams, where they just find, even on nights where they don't really have it, Brunson just cooks down the stretch, or Dante or Josh goes flying in for a last second block or steal to preserve a win. And it feels like either they cruise in those games, or they just know that they could turn it on in the last 2 or 3 minutes and win games. And that's the mark of a great team. And I'm going to look for them to be able to do that consistently this year. Of course, you want to excel against the other title contenders, and you want to win in the prove it games. But this team, to your point with Tibbs, does not take their foot off the pedal. And they just have players who just have the innate focus to not overlook anyone. And I think that's where I feel like it's such a safe bet that they go over 53.5, because they're just going to bank 20 something wins against the bottom of the East. That's still not very good.
Yeah. I think that That's a big thing to consider. And I'd forgotten about that stat too. I was trying to just remember it. And I was trying to find if I could Google it. I couldn't find it, but I remember it being at one point they were like 21-1 or something, like against teams under 500, and that's just great. Like, I do think that they do have just the fortitude to pull those off. And I mean, we sort of saw that, right? Like when they got super not as injured as in the playoffs, obviously, but when they were dealing with the pretty heavy injuries like before and around the All-Star break last year, we kept being like, when is this magical ride going to end? Because that January was so great and they played so well with their basically full strength roster minus Mitch. And then OG goes down, Randall goes down, Brunson has to miss a game or two. Just all these guys are down, and you're like running out like Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart and Precious Achua is like your heroes in any given game. And that was when Deuce finally like claimed his his right to minutes and everything else. And they just managed to pull these games out and win those games. And I feel like this team is not going to lose that quality, certainly, considering that they just got better, or at least added another one of the super friends in Mikal Bridges. So I think that plays heavy into this win total argument as well. Is like, this is the team that doesn't, I've sort of been saying this since the beginning of the show. Like, this is the team that treats every game like it's a playoff game. That Tibbs certainly does. And Tibbs isn't going to just like, if his team's down 10 with 7 minutes to go or whatever, you're never going to catch Tibbs being like, well, I guess Brunson could use a couple extra minutes of rest tonight. He's going to be like, no, go out there and score 10 points and win this freaking game, and let's take home this win so we can keep adding to the win total. And I feel like this year that may be a pretty big deal because with how talented the East has gotten, I think that 2 seed is going to be really valuable this year. And I think it was for them this past year too, if I'm being honest. Like, they played great at the Garden. And I think that having a potential game 7 at the Garden in a winner go home scenario is always what you want. And so I think the Knicks are going to have that in the front of their minds, not even in the back of their minds, front of their minds all year. Like, playoff seeding is important, and securing our home court is important, and they're going to keep approaching every single game that way. So I think that there's a good chance that they keep taking care of business against the sort of cellar dweller teams, and that could inflate the win total as well. But Gavin, we got a few more points to get into, and also to make our prediction of what we think they're going to win, as far as their actual win total that we'll throw out there and see if we're right or wrong come 8 months from now or whatever. But we'll take just a second and come back in and talk through all that. All right, Gavin, before we get to the official predictions here and the talking through what we think the Knicks are actually going to win based off that 53.5 over under that FanDuel is set for them, is there any other points that you want to get into before we hit the final part of the show here?
Yeah, so 2 big ones. To me, the final 2 biggest questions is, can they figure out ways to maximize spacing with Mitch on the floor? And I think you made a great point earlier that I've been guilty of this because I've been harping on it all offseason, like leaning too much into the negatives that Mitch brings and not the positives, like the fact that this team is going to have like 4 studs on the floor offensively around Mitchell Robinson, and then you have like the best offensive rebounder along with Steven Adams in like modern NBA history to just gobble it up whenever they do miss. And like we saw in the past that they like it was a recipe for elite offense, even when the tertiary pieces were RJ Barrett and like guys who like Alec Burks, like guys who just like weren't like quite at the level of what they have now. So even with the fact that like everyone's shooting, and I just retweeted like some stats on this the other day, like you could look it off like pretty much across the board, like guys shootings dropped like 3 to 10% with Mitch instead of iHeart, which is concerning. Like Mitch inherently compensates for some of that with his offensive rebounding, compensates for that with, to your point, like the defense being even a little bit better than it was with iHeart, which is saying something because iHeart statistically was like by some metrics a top 5 defender in the NBA. But I still think I think that continues to be a concern. And I think there's a world where the offense, like as much as I think that they're going to get off to a great start overall, there's a world where the offense like does not look totally like a well-oiled machine initially, and they're going to have some figuring out to do to adjust back to Mitch and to adjust to not having Dante DiVincenzo in the lineup, which is another few feet of spacing loss with him relative to Mikal Bridges. And then the other thing, I'll let you go in on because I've talked about it quite a bit, but I'm curious, like, what the psychology of this team is in that, like, on paper, like, it should all be really good. You have a bunch of guys led by Jalen Brunson who have shown financially they are certainly willing to sacrifice shots wise. Like, you look at Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo early last year. Obviously, Hart had like his one complaint, but for the most part, they didn't complain when they weren't getting a lot of shots, a lot of touches. So this seems like a team that's mature enough to handle that. But it's a question on any great team, particularly any great team, Alex, that just has a whole lot of depth. Like, will Dante take some issue with the fact that last year was a breakout year for him? And I almost can't see how there's not a statistical step back this year for him, given that he's going to be playing less minutes, given that I don't think he's going to be able to get up 8 threes a game again, playing maybe 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 10 less minutes a night. Julius, I think he's going to get his shots and touches. He's going to be asked to do it in different ways. He's going to be a little bit more frustrated with Mitchell at center. That's going to be tough for him. Mikal going from the number 1 option to a clear-cut number 3. I think he's probably okay with that. Jalen like has to snap back from being like MVP, 30 plus usage Jalen to maybe a usage more like mid 20s. Is he okay with that now that he's hit the highs of being like, again, a top 5 MVP finisher? Deuce is getting grossly underpaid and his minutes are going to go down to probably under like 12 to 15 a night. Like, is he cool with that? Mitch, like, there is always discontent kind of burbling there with his perceived lack of touches. And Julius Randle, I guess just circling back, like, always like a possibility that he self-destructs. Like, do you think with all the weapons this team has, is there a world where that backfires? Because to me, like, if I'm being honest, outside of just a catastrophic injury, that's the only way I think this goes wrong, is if like the chemistry doesn't work. But to me, that also just seems like such a long shot.
Yeah, it feels like a long shot to me just because the only new element that you're adding to this team is Bridges, who by all accounts seems very easygoing. Seems like obviously gets along with the 3 Villanova guys, and Campaign, is a previous teammate of his. So he has a lot of people already, in the organization that he knows intimately and, has played with and, just has great friendships with and everything else. I think maybe there's a chance of some, a little bit of discord here or there. But I feel like from the perspective of a Josh Hart or a Dante DiVincenzo, all you'd have to do is remind them of like, oh, like, would you guys prefer it more where once we had a couple injuries last year, you had to play like 48 minutes a game for like 2 whole weeks at a time?
And didn't have your best friend on this team? And
yeah.
Yeah.
And didn't have one of your best friends on the team who's an Iron Man who plays every single game. Like, I think it's an easy sell to be like, hey, more depth is better. And it's not like Dante DiVincenzo is being held back by like Quentin Grimes now, which I can maybe see where if last year he was like, he got in through training camp, was like, I think I'm a better player than Quentin Grimes. And yeah, I just have to wait for that to bear out now. And I could see where that would be kind of frustrating. Or, Josh Hart kind of didn't have a ton of minutes. And then, also it was probably both of them were a little irked about being behind like Grimes, for example, just because he was not playing well. And, that's enough to then be like, well, why can't I play? Like, I want to be playing instead of this dude who like is regressing and can't shoot. Now it's like they're both losing minutes because one of their best friends got traded to the team and he's a superstar now. And like, he's going to probably play 33, 34 minutes a game or something like that. And I just don't think that that's going to affect them too much. And then Julius, like, I just feel like I don't think that he ever since in the Jalen Brunson era, I feel like we have not seen any semblance of Moody Randall. And I think that Moody Randall comes when he has too many expectations put on him. I think it's if he is the alpha dog and the team is not performing, it goes back to him. He catches a couple boosts from the crowd. He gets in his feelings and like it just breaks him. And that's what we saw in 21 and 22. But like, for example, we saw last year, he came out and he struggled pretty heavily to start the season. Like really not just a little bit, like he was atrocious to start last year, which is easy to forget because he really picked it up after that. And was shooting so good that like, if you look at his overall numbers from last year, like where he ended by the time he got hurt, his year last year looks way worse on paper than it was, because
Mhm.
it was really just brought down by like 5 weeks of just garbage play to start the year. Just the worst basketball you could ever want to see out of him. And yet, throughout all that, he kept his head up. He kept smiling. He seemed fine. He worked his way
A
through
dirty
it
look to Jalen Brunson here or there, but other than that,
once or twice,
Yeah.
but like everybody's going to get frustrated if they're not playing well. But he didn't
Mhm.
make it everybody else's problem for the most part. Didn't seem like that way. So I don't really have any reason to believe that that's going to happen anymore. Um, unless we see it, of course, unless maybe he like starts feeling left out or whatever of, like, oh, it's all the Villanova guys or blah, blah, blah. Like I feel left out, this, that, the other. Then maybe the Knicks look to trade him or something. Cause at that point it's like, well, we're going to stick with the core that we've invested all this money and time and effort into procuring, and not you, who was like Randall was a holdover from the previous administration. He's
Yeah.
like one of the last guys. Although I think that this front office has grown to love him and everything, but still it's I don't know. I think I just don't see too much. I don't see too many possibilities for chemistry issues to kick in. Maybe the only one that I feel the most like there might be something would be Deuce, only because it wasn't him so much, but like some of his family members, if I'm remembering correctly, were like sort of tweeting a little crazy last year, being like, "Oh, how do you go from like, you know, not playing at all to playing like 48 minutes? Like, what is this team? Whatever."
Yeah.
So if that sort of stuff starts happening again, I mean, whatever. I don't think it'll derail anything. It seems like Deuce is fine. It's just some people in his circle were tweeting a little crazy last year or
Look,
whatever. So
more time for TikToks if he's not playing.
exactly. And he can do more TikTok dances
Yeah.
and stuff, it'll be great. Him and Jared McCain, the rivalry is going to be legendary.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel pretty good about the chemistry aspect. That's one thing that really does not worry me too much personally.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think at the end of the day, like Jalen just set the tone with the money sacrifice, and he's gonna have to back that up with at least a little bit of his, not a major sacrifice, but a little bit of a sacrifice on the court. And I think if your star is doing everything right and you're winning games, like they're just like everything's gonna kind of fall in line. I think to Tibbs's credit, like over the years, like people have complained. There have been moments where it's like a little dicey, but to your point, outside that one season, like it's never deterred the team. It's never become like a major thing. It's been very rare they've had to trade someone because of a personality conflict. Like for the most part, like the ships just run on time at the end of the day, and you're either on board or you're off board. And this team, like one thing you can say about them, they are bought in to the nth degree, and I think that will always win out, even if like as you're riding that roller coaster, like it gets a little dicey at times. And you know what? That is a reality for pretty much every great team in the NBA. Like someone who's always unhappy. So if the Knicks are in that position, it is actually a good sign. But Alex, let's wrap up with our win predictions on Josh's show. I said 56. I think I was trying to show off. It was a little bit of like an FU to like anyone watching who's not a Knicks fan, be like 56 wins. What is he talking about? On our show on home turf, home territory, I'm gonna take that down by one. I don't need to blow out the 53 and a half. I just need to go to 54. I'm gonna go one over. I'm gonna say 55 wins for the Knicks this year. But what do you think? How many games did they win?
I'm gonna just fully lean into my homerism and strive to beat your first one, because otherwise everyone's going to accuse me of not being a real fan or whatever, or something.
Sure.
So I'm going to go with 57.
Nice.
And I'll just be like, hey, let's just go big. I mean, that would be what was the highest total that the Knicks won during the 90s? Did they win 60?
I don't know off the top of my head.
That's a error. This is something that can very easily be answered with a quick basketball
Well,
reference.
I'll say this. They were on track to win about 72 last year when OG Anunoby was playing the regular season. So if he plays, theoretically, could be a high number.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? So let's just go through. Let's try to find when the Knicks. Okay, so they won 60 and then 57 in back-to-back years, 92-93 and then 93-94, and that's Eastern Conference Finals team and a Finals team. So obviously setting the bar pretty high there. But I think they can do it. I think this team is going to do it. I hope that they can get over the hump with, getting to the finals and potentially winning a championship. But I think no matter what, they're going to wow during the regular season. I mean, you look at the last time that Tibbs had a team with this much talent. like top to bottom and this much versatility and everything else is probably during his Bulls run, when he had an MVP caliber Derrick Rose and, Joakim Noah running it at center and Luol Deng on that team and great depth, that powered them through and put them ahead of a team that everybody thought was going to be better than them in the Miami Heat. Like, I think there's a real chance that this Knicks team maybe finishes the number 1 seed. Like, they can maybe oust the Celtics in that way. You want to talk about a team where sooner than later there might be a little bit of trouble in paradise. It would be the Celtics, who in like a year's time are probably going to have to make some really tough decisions about some of their players. And obviously there was all the Olympic drama this offseason,
which we avoided by having no one on the team.
Because Jalen Brunson was healing a hand. I was still salty the whole time that Halliburton was there regardless. Just bring Jalen Brunson along as your mascot instead of Halliburton. Like, he's way cooler. But either way,
we would have been the Celtics fans in that scenario, though.
Yeah, I guess so. But either way, I think 57. I'm just going high. Screw it. I don't know. Maybe they even get 60. Who knows? I don't know. That would be pretty cool. That would be really fun. I mean, can you imagine like how good it felt hitting that 50th win this year if they managed to win 60 the next year? That would be pretty freaking sweet.
I think we would be insufferable to anyone who's not a Knicks fan. Fortunately, I don't think anyone who's not a Knicks fan listens frequently. So
I think we're safe there. So, but if they did manage to pull off 60, that would only be the 3rd time in franchise history if they did that as well. So I just looked that up as well.
And it's doable. Like, if they're healthy, totally doable. Yeah.
And they won 60 the year that they won the finals in 69 to 70. The second time they won the finals, they won 57, which is the number that I think they're going to get. And then, like I said, the back-to-back seasons in the 90s, it was 60 and then 57 wins. So pretty magical numbers for the Knicks there. Oh, in 96, 97, they won 57 as well. I think I screwed that up. So yeah, either way. I feel pretty good about that. And I feel pretty good about this episode, Gavin. We've gone on long enough about this one single topic to talk about. So next time we're going to talk about multiple odds-based topics. Another episode brought to you by FanDuel, if you couldn't tell. But until then, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.